What time is it? It's nation time.
Welcome to the AfterWords program. I'm your host, Baba Kafense Chike. I'm joined by our Cardinal and Bayou Chewy, this week's preacher of our sermon, Time to Do a New Thing. Welcome to the AfterWords program, Cardinal and Bayou. Happy New Year's, and thank you for today's sermon and this conversation.
Happy New Year. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Today's sermon scripture comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, book 3 of Ecclesiastes, verses 1 through 8. And this scripture informs us that there is a time for everything, and there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heaven. You begin by explaining that the new year is a time for renewal and that it is part of the sacred cosmic cycle in which we can find an opportunity to apply what we have gleaned from our prior experiences, lessons, trials, and tests to carry forth our purpose in the mission to fulfill divine will. And for me, you provide a spiritual context for New Year's that exceeds the typical context of making resolutions, which are often broken. Please elaborate on the connection to the sacred cosmic cycle and the role that purpose, mission, and the fulfillment play during this time of renewal for us.
Well, from a spiritual perspective, I see that scripture as in line with the African worldview that everything is connected. Everything is connected to everything. So humans live on a planet that has its own cycles and seasons, and that means that we are to live in alignment with those cycles and seasons rather than trying to go against them, right? We can't change nature. We're part of nature. And so that means we have to align ourselves with the patterns and cycles and seasons that are natural to our environment. And so in that context, every new year is the beginning of a new season, a new cycle, and a new pattern of energies. And so it would behoove us as energy beings, right, to understand how we fit into that and what that means. And I can go into the many African cosmologies that explain it, like the one I'm most familiar with, the Dagara cosmology. So 2025 is an Earth year, right? So we're being called during this year to realign ourselves with the energy of the Earth and with the Earth seasons and cycles and patterns, and to do what we can to nourish and nurture one another as the Earth provides us with nourishment and nurturing, and the things that we need to sustain ourselves and to sustain life.
You know, I think it's interesting that you assert that 2025 is the year of the Earth, particularly as we find ourselves under some new challenges going into this year. But you clearly, for me, have tied it to the essence or the sacred cycle, if you will. You challenge us during this period of renewal to establish some new categories of self-representation that will lead to our collective empowerment and urge us to realize our shared potential, represent ourselves to the world as self-realized, self-determined, and to transform ourselves into a more unified and intentional Black community that can contribute to our own sustainable reality. Would you please revisit it? Because you talk about it in the sermon, but I'd like to ask you to maybe revisit why this is important for our people at this time.
Well, there's so much going on in the world, right? And what we see on the world stage is groups with power vying to assert their vision of the future very forcefully all over the planet. And so it would behoove us as African Americans, and not just African people who live in America, but all across the diaspora, African people everywhere, need to be in the dialogue and the conversation at the table and representing, showing up with our vision of who we are and what we want our future to look like as African people, and to value our voice and our ability, right, to navigate and chart a course for ourselves in the world, and not expect somebody to do that for us, or not to just lay down and let somebody else define and name and decide for us how we're going to fit in to the world. And we can clearly see the world is changing. AI, technology, everything is changing. And if we're not at the table, if we're not in the conversation, if we're not creating opportunities for ourselves, then we're going to get the worst of what's left, or either perpetuate and reinforce the same cycle of poverty, ignorance, powerlessness that we find ourselves in almost everywhere on the planet.
You know, as I was listening to your response, I revisited the idea of my mind as I was thinking about the cyclical nature of creation, the idea of the sacred cosmic cycle. And I just was reminded as you challenge us or invite us to return to ourselves in a sense, that we may be in a phase of this cycle that can be tied to us being the people that, taught other beings how to be human. We created the first civilizations, religion, and things like that. Do you have a thought about that idea that maybe we're cycling around again in a spirit of renewal of the world?
Well, yeah, I would like to believe that, because, like you just said, we taught the world how to be civilized, how to be human. And in this time in this information age and all of this new evolution of technology, we really have to, as humans on the planet, redefine what that looks like, what humanity looks like. And as we get into bioengineering and all these new technologies that deal with the human body, right? We have to be in the conversation about what humanity means, what humanity is, and nobody else is going to do that, because nobody has the genetic memory that we have. Because our ancestors brought those gifts of civilization to the world. So it really is our call. Whether we can rise to the occasion and accept that call is a whole nother question.
Thank you for that. And could you maybe say a bit more about how this idea of renewal, reinvigoration, ties into the best self philosophy and programs of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church, and can assist us in doing this new thing that you invite and or challenge us to do?
Well, the best self theology, or philosophy, as I like to call it, reflects our traditional understanding as African people of who we are and what our purpose is on the earth. It's the call of every generation to evolve to our higher self, and to use our gifts, our talents, our skills, our abilities to create a better environment for ourselves and those who will come after us. And so that call to evolve and to grow and to improve uh, is the epitome of what our purpose is in this new time that we're living in. We have to model that for other groups and other people, and we have to make sure that our descendants, those who come after us, understand their responsibility, because it's really millennials and Gen Z and the beta generation that's coming after them. It's really upon them, right, to take ownership of their leg of this new struggle and to run with that. So we have to impart and pass on that knowledge and that understanding to those generations. We have to raise the consciousness level, like, so much like we did in the 60s. That's really coming into the time that we're in now. It's about consciousness raising and helping the new generations to recognize what their responsibility and collective role is as a group. The struggle we're in now, and you can't fight it as an individual. You got to be a part of a group.
Yeah,
That's kind of why I end with that. You got to be a part of a movement, of an organization. This is not the work of an individual.
And you know, we almost out of time, but if you could maybe say a little bit about how uh, this society has socialized us in a way to be so programmed to be individualized or individualistic. So how do we move from that to, I would go as far as say, save ourselves?
Well, yeah, that's the challenge, right? We've been conditioned to be not just hyper individualistic, self-centered, self-obsessed, but consumption driven, right? We take so lightly uh the way we have been conditioned to just consume, consume, consume. Which is why the earth is in the state it's in, which is why the world is in the state it's in, because we are so focused on consumption rather than what we can give, what we have to offer one another, the world. So we really have to change the mindset to answer your question. We have to change that mindset. And we know it's possible to do that. But people have to first recognize the damage that Western individualism has done, capitalism has done, materialism has done to the whole world. And people would be open, especially young people would be open to understand and appreciate that and would be able to make the mind shift that's necessary. Us older generations, not so much. But young people are definitely ripe for some new ideas, some new information, some new understanding, and new direction. Uh, so we have to raise their consciousness.
I would think that's probably consistent with what has occurred from generation to generation over time. Uh, Unfortunately, we're out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for a powerful sermon and an insightful conversation. Uh, Anything you like to say before we go? I mean, you've said a bunch.
Well, 2025 is going to test us for sure, as individuals and as a group. So I'm an optimist, so I believe we can rise to the occasion. But it's our responsibility, those of us who have been in the struggle for a while, to recognize what we're being called to do and to be about that.
Thank you so much again for a very insightful conversation and a powerful sermon. We invite our guests to continue to join us every week for these discussions and our weekly sermons. And we close the words of our patron saint, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Up, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will.
What time is it? It's nation time.